Well, welcome back to Sweet Sycamore Devotions. I'm Nicole, as you probably already know. Hopefully, you've been joining me through our Among the 12 series. We have talked through the disciples this season. We have started the chronological walk with Jesus through the scriptures, hopefully looking through the eyes of the disciples. And today we are talking about following through fallout. And when Jesus returned to his hometown and wasn't accepted, has that ever happened to you? It's like you go to your familiar spot where people knew you before you had Jesus living in your heart, and you're going with Jesus and you think that they're going to be excited, and they're not. Well, I can tell you that Jesus experienced the same thing that you have experienced, and we're going to walk with him through the story today. And it starts in Luke 4. In verse 14, it says, "Then Jesus returned to Galilee, filled with the Holy Spirit's power. Reports about him spread quickly through the whole region." I always see the word then, and I'm like, okay, well, what happened before? And obviously in Luke 3, we have where John the Baptist baptizes Jesus. He goes into the wilderness for these 40 days, tempted by the devil, and then he starts calling his disciples. So this is very fresh in Jesus's ministry. And it says that reports about him spread quickly already throughout the region. And we can probably attribute a lot of this to John the Baptist. Remember, he was going around 6 months prior to Jesus coming out, talking about being the Messiah, and he was proclaiming Jesus. And so a lot of these reports probably came from John the Baptist, and that's why he was having these followers right at the beginning. But then verse 15 says he taught regularly in their synagogue and was praised by everyone. Then he came to the village of Nazareth, his boyhood home, and he went as usual to the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read the scriptures. If you are a Bakersfield girl like me, the best way I can describe these cities is he is in Galilee and he is going to Nazareth. It's like you are in Kern County and you are traveling by foot and you arrive at Taft, okay? So Galilee was this massive region and Nazareth was this little tiny city within Galilee. Now, I find it interesting that Jesus was going into the synagogue and teaching. He wasn't going out and healing the poor. He wasn't doing all these miracles left and right like we will soon see in his ministry. He is literally just going into the synagogue and he is teaching. And I want us to sit there for just a minute because I love how Jesus does not go straight to this emotionalism. Like he could gather followers a lot faster by doing all these miracles, but he really wanted there to be a knowing of him, this intellectual understanding. He is going after their heart, their soul, not just their emotions. And I think he does the same thing for us. And I think we need to understand that he desires for us to really know him through the word, know him through the words he is speaking over us. I think that's really important, not just the hype of the miracles. So verse 17, it says, the scroll of Isaiah, the prophet, was handed to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where this was written. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and the time of the Lord's favor has come. He rolled up the scroll, handed it back to the attendant, and sat down. All eyes in the synagogue looked at him intently, and then he began to speak to them. The scripture you've just heard has been fulfilled this very day. Everyone spoke well of him and was amazed by the gracious words that came from his lips. How can this be? They asked. Isn't this Joseph's son? Now, Jesus was quoting Isaiah 61 as something that they would have been studying to know when the coming Messiah, like when he was here. And Jesus literally is reading it and saying, the time has come. Like he is telling them, I am the Messiah. And they are amazed. They aren't skeptical right at first. They're like, whoa, you know what? They're believing it until almost like a flip, like a switch goes off. And then they go, whoa, wait a minute. Wait, you're Joseph's son. First of all, I find it interesting that Jesus grew up in this area and they can't come at him for anything, really proving that Jesus was perfect. However, they can go after his dad. Now, was he really Joseph's son? Well, actually, he was the Son of God, born of the Virgin Mary. However, he was raised by Joseph. Joseph would have been his father that they would have seen as he raised him, taught him things. And when we see this, we know Joseph was still human. I'm sure he was not a perfect man. And so therefore, the only imperfections they can attribute to Jesus is being Joseph's son. And Joseph's failures, they say, oh yeah, but Jesus was Joseph's son. But I also find it interesting that Jesus can stand up there And they can be so amazed, and they can turn on the skeptic switch so fast. And I want to sit more here. We're actually going to sit a little bit more here on that topic in our next devotion, because we can be like, well, we would never do that. But how often do you hear something in the word and you're like, oh, Lord, you're so good. And then 2 seconds later, you're like, but wait a minute, what about this? Or I don't know if I'm worthy of that. And we immediately go into this skeptic mindset. And we'll talk more about that in our next devotion as we do in part 2. But I want to keep up with Jesus here in this story. So we're going to pick up in verse 23. It says, then he said, you will undoubtedly quote me this proverb, physician, heal yourself, meaning do miracles here in your hometown, like those you did in Capernaum. But I tell you the truth, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. Certainly there were many needy widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the heavens were closed for 3.5 years and a severe famine devastated the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them. He was sent instead to a foreigner, a widow of Zarephath, in the land of Sidon. And many in Israel had leprosy in the time of the prophet Elisha, but the only one healed was Naaman, a Syrian. When they heard this, the people in the synagogue were furious. Furious. They're not just angry. They're not like complacent. They're not like, whatever. They are furious. Why? Why are they so furious? You see, Jesus is going after a core belief that they have that is incorrect. And that is the Jewish people believed that they were better than the Gentiles. They believed they were more loved by God. They were more cared by God. And Jesus is going after him, going, hey, I may have always called you my chosen people, but you're the ones actually denying me. I am going to go after the Gentiles, which the Gentiles are what we consider anybody who is non-Jew. I'm going to go after the Gentiles because they actually don't have these preconceived notions of what I'm supposed to be doing or what I'm supposed to look like or how this whole thing is supposed to go down. And they are hungry for me. So not only that, they are willing to receive me as I am, and even the hard things that I am teaching them, because they are hungry. One thing I have known through the scriptures and just through history is God will always show up for the hungriest. And it makes me ask that question, like, am I hungry? Am I willing to receive even the tough conversations or let go of my preconceived notions because I'm so hungry for God? And as Jesus is going after this really block of pride in their heart, they are angry at him. And I mean, so angry that we see in verse 29, it says, jumping up, they mobbed him, forced him to the edge of the hill on which the town was built. They intended to push him over the cliff, but he passed right through the crowd and went on his way. You guys, they were willing to kill him because of what he was going after in their hearts. Like, this isn't like, I'm mad. This is, I'm willing to commit murder. Now, I would love to see this story. I have this like fun belief in my own heart that when we get to heaven, we can just like press a button and watch these stories unfold. And maybe that's not true, but maybe it's just wishful thinking. However, this is another story I want to see happen, because were they like pushing on him and then all of a sudden they were like pushing on their brother in front of them, and they like, did somebody like accidentally go over the cliff because they thought that Jesus was, I don't know. But I do know Jesus passed right through them. Like, it wasn't like he appeared someplace else. Like, he passed right through them. Like, was the guy in the very back like dwindling, just kind of watching it all happen? Did he watch Jesus walk the crowd and walk off and go, what? I mean, I don't know. I would love to know someday. But what I do know is this, is Jesus hit the core of these Jewish people. And when he hit their core, they not only got defensive, but they were ready to actually make him be non-existent in their life. And before we go, I would never do that. How often is God speaking to us? And he's going after a core belief that is not supposed to be there. And we are not only trying to shut him out of that area, but we're also like, we are done speaking. You don't even exist to me, right? And so when I see this, I think we need to challenge this belief in our own life, because the Jewish people thought that they knew Jesus, but really they didn't know him. They thought that they knew him because he existed in their own hometown, but really they didn't know him. There's this hometown vibe, or kind of like hometown hangups, you can call it, that go against when we think we know somebody, but really we don't know them. Perhaps it's being too familiar with somebody or being skeptical of them. Oh, Jesus really changed you? Yeah, we'll wait 5 years and see, Or maybe it's jealousy. Like, Lord, I thought you could change me, but you changed them instead. Like, and I'm still dealing with this hang up. And then we get jealous of people. You see, we're going to go in a little bit deeper on how do we deal with when we're welcomed into our hometown, what looks like we're welcomed, but then we're immediately turned off, where people immediately get furious with us, where people immediately get skeptical or maybe get jealous of us. How do we deal with that? That's going to be more in our next devotion, because Jesus actually tells us how to deal with those things. But like always, I want to leave you with a couple questions, because I think that we can take this just one step deeper today and really process this. And the first is have you encountered resistance to your faith when you have gone into a familiar hometown vibe? And I will tell you that if you are like, man, I have, I'll tell you, so has Jesus. And you can find comfort in that and knowing that you are not alone there. But I also want to ask you this question. Have you ever been the resistance to other people? And I think this is a question we need to just chew on for a minute. And that is, has somebody come home and they went away, maybe a different person, but they came back with Jesus? What is your response? Are you their cheerleader? Are you encouraging them? Or are you the skeptic? Are you too familiar with them that you can't put aside what they did to you in middle school? Are we jealous? And I think those are questions we have to ask, because not only do we want to put our shoes in with the disciples, I think we have to put our feet in with the crowd and ask, are we anybody else's resistance? We have barely touched the story. We have another devotion actually telling us, how do we walk through this? What do we do? Because Jesus does tell us what to do when we are not accepted in our hometown. But that's for our next devotion. I loved getting into the Word with you today, and we will do it again in just a couple weeks.